Hi, and welcome to The Binger. The third season of Stranger Things is quite a ride. Full of conspiracies, the resurgence of the Mind Flayer, and awesome team-ups, the show is as exciting as ever. Although we love Stranger Things and its characters, there are times when those characters make terrible decisions. And in Stranger Things 3, the characters make some of the most head-scratching decisions yet. In this video, we're talking about the worst decisions the characters made in the show's third season. Be warned, there are some big spoilers ahead. Sheriff Jim Hopper has been a fan favorite since the first season of Stranger Things. Sure, he could be intense and hot-headed, but he always tried and often came through. In Season 2, though, he was shown to have some terrible instincts when it came to Elle. He isolated the young psychic from her friends, never allowing her to leave his cabin. While his intention was to keep her safe, his desire to hide her from everyone led him to ignore everything else a young teenager needs. Eventually, Hopper showed that he could be the adult in the room and be a good parent to Elle. So his official adoption of her made perfect sense. By the beginning of Season 3, though, Hopper's parenting took a turn. He did a poor job handling Elle and Mike's relationship. His rule about keeping Elle's bedroom door open 3 inches made sense. However, he seemed unable to establish further boundaries or even bring the subject up, despite the fact that Joyce told him exactly what to do. Hopper attempted to initiate the conversation, but instead of staying calm and collected and being the adult in the room, he let the kid's behavior get to him. That's when the talk he'd planned went out the window and his strategy morphed into something far worse. Hopper lied to Mike about his grandmother being sick to get him away from Elle. Then Hopper bullied and intimidated Mike about his behavior with his daughter. Sure, Mike was acting obnoxious and disrespectful, but Hopper's retaliation was inappropriate. He was once again trying to control Elle by keeping her apart from someone she cared about. And that wasn't his choice to make. Poor Joyce has absolutely been through the ringer over the first 2 seasons of Stranger Things. Not only did her son fall victim to mysterious forces twice, she also watched her boyfriend get attacked by demodogs right in front of her. So it's no wonder that by the time Season 3 rolls around, Joyce was on edge at the very hint that something otherworldly could be going on. However, that leads her to ignore what her sons are going through outside of anything related to the supernatural. Will, in particular, has spent so much time contending with the Upside Down that his friends have largely moved on without him. Will is feeling abandoned and out of step with the peers he used to rely on most, and Joyce is oblivious. Yet, just when it seems Joyce and Will might have a real conversation, Joyce gets distracted by the magnets that fell off of her refrigerator. She spends most of the rest of the season trying to figure out what's going on with those magnets and what it might mean for Hawkins. And she's certainly correct that something strange is happening, but her search for answers takes her away from her kids. She has no idea that Will is feeling the Mind Flayer again, or that Jonathan is off investigating fertilizer-feasting rats. And she barely checks in to find out. Sure, she's trying to help them, but she's doing it in a way that takes her from the sons that rely on her. Mrs. Wheeler is old enough to be Billy's mom, but that doesn't stop Billy from propositioning her. While Mrs. Wheeler eventually agrees to meet Billy, she clearly has misgivings and ultimately decides not to go through with it. Even though Mrs. Wheeler's consideration of the idea is questionable enough, in the end it's Billy who pays dearly. While on the road to meet Mrs. Wheeler, Billy wrecks his car and is pulled into the old mill by some unseen force. He becomes the first human victim of the Mind Flayer, and as the creature's patient zero, spends the rest of the season as its minion. It may have been Hopper that initiated that lie about Mike's grandmother being ill, but it's Mike who continues it. Mike could have told Elle the truth, or even said that he needed to take a night away, but instead he goes with a transparent falsehood. Mike has always told Eleven that friends don't lie, and then he does exactly that. And since he doesn't lie especially well, Elle immediately knows what's happening. This leads to a rift between the pair that ends in her angrily dumping him. As a result, Max and Elle and the boys stay away from one another for a decent chunk of the season. When Nancy gets a call about rats acting strangely in the basement of one of the town's elderly residents, she secretly pursues the lead. Along with Jonathan, she goes to Mrs. Driscoll's house to check out the rats. Yet when she goes to the editors about the story, she's dismissed and fired for her efforts. Had she and Jonathan waited just a few seconds before leaving that basement, though, the results might have been very different. Jonathan knew something was happening to the rat Mrs. Driscoll had caught and caged. Instead of insisting on staying to see what happens to the ailing creature, though, he follows Nancy to chase down another lead. This prevents him from getting the money shot of the rat bursting into a pile of mind-flayed goo. That information could have completely changed the investigation, not to mention enabled the pair to warn the town about what was going on. Nancy may not have made the best choices with her rat investigation, but it's easy to see why she felt the need to follow the story in secret. Even before the lead came to her attention, her time at the Hawkins Post had been grueling. The all-male reporters who worked there didn't see Nancy as anything more than the girl who fetches their lunch and pours their coffee. While Jonathan is given real responsibilities as a photographer, Nancy's ambitions are met with nothing but ridicule. The misogynists in the newsroom don't take her seriously for her ideas and mock her for showing initiative. So even though Nancy brings up several stories that could be of interest to a local newspaper, the men barely listen. As a result, they miss the potential significance of the story about the rats and end up being mind-flayed themselves. If Hopper's behavior with Mike and Elle wasn't childish enough, his behavior with Joyce was even worse. And the next 3 decisions demonstrate this. They were all equally ill-advised choices he made in his relationship with Joyce. First, despite her clear hesitation, he insists on going to dinner with her. And then he tells her that it's not a date, even though he clearly thinks it is. Hopper is completely oblivious to Joyce's feelings and bends the truth to get what he wants. On top of that, when Joyce tells Hopper about her concerns about the demagnetized magnets, he doesn't take her seriously. He accuses her of making things up just to create problems and avoid being happy. Yet Joyce has consistently been right about strange things happening in Hawkins since the very beginning. At this point, you'd think she'd earned the right to be heard. One of the reasons Hopper dismisses Joyce's worries about the magnets is that she stood him up to research the phenomenon. And if his anger stopped there, it would be understandable. They made a plan to go out, and Joyce didn't meet him when she said she would. She didn't even call him to apologize for not coming. So it's reasonable for Hopper to be hurt. Yet things take a turn when Hopper discovers Joyce went to see Mr. Clark for help in her investigation instead of having dinner with him. Hopper's jealousy over her spending time with the science teacher is completely out of line, especially since he insisted their dinner wasn't a date. Nonetheless, he shamelessly implies that Joyce was seeing Mr. Clark romantically and completely ignores her reasoning for seeking out another man's help. For viewers, the addition of Lucas's little sister Erika to the Mind Flayer fighting team in Season 3 was a lot of fun. Yet Steve, Dustin, and Robin recruiting the much younger Erika to crawl through the air ducts wasn't actually the best idea. It's bad enough that the teenagers were blindly chasing down a Russian conspiracy. However, roping Erika in is, as she points out, child endangerment. Of course, Erika is a savvy negotiator and makes sure she's well compensated, but even free ice cream sundaes aren't worth risking your life. Although Erika's help proves invaluable to the trio's plan, it also leads to one more person being trapped in an underground Soviet bunker. Hopper's anger at the mayor is understandable. He comes to him for information about a mysterious man who beat him up, and the mayor first tries to lie and then threatens him. Hopper's had a bad night and finally snaps. He wants to know who attacked him and is willing to use his fist to get the information. Of course, he's beating up the town's leader and one who happens to be in bed with the Russians. Turning the mayor against him and alerting him to his and Joyce's suspicions about what's going on in Hawkins proves dangerous. Had Hopper found a smoother way to handle Klein and get the information he needed, things may not have escalated the way they did. This may be one of the most boneheaded decisions of the entire season. After Erika opens the door to the Russian bunker, Steve, Robin, and Dustin pile in without a thought about the possible consequences. Yet they already know men with guns guard the entrance, so something worth protecting with lethal force must be there. And the kids have no clue what it could be. After discovering the mysterious entrance, they could have called Hopper or another government authority. Instead, their approach isn't even stealthy. Not only do they get trapped in the elevator, when it opens, they walk right into the base. This leads to Robin and Steve getting caught and brutally interrogated by the Russians. After Joyce and Hopper kidnap Alexi, the Russian scientist, and blow up Hopper's vehicle, they must find another way back to civilization. The first place they stumble across is a gas station, and Hopper decides to commandeer the first car he comes across. Unfortunately, that car is a flashy convertible with vanity plates. Hopper and Joyce should be doing their best to be as inconspicuous as possible. After all, Grigory, the Russian Arnold Schwarzenegger, is still after them. Plus, the man they took the car from is not the kind of person who's likely to stay quiet about what happened. And it turns out the cashier who witnessed the whole thing isn't either. So it's no surprise that Grigory quickly learns what kind of car he can find Hopper, Joyce, and Alexi in. Hopper may be the sheriff, but he's not so good at being covert. The car may have solved the group's immediate problem and gotten them away from Grigory, but it's so obvious that it ultimately helps Grigory track them down. After Joyce and Hopper kidnap the Russian scientist, they must find someone to translate so they can understand what he's saying. So they go one state over from Indiana to the only man who speaks Russian either of them know. Except that man is an eccentric who terrorizes them with a gun. Plus, they leave Indiana without informing their kids about where they're going. Yeah, Joyce and Hopper are mostly concerned with anything that might negatively impact their children. Yet despite that, they leave their children in the lurch. They don't realize they're not the only ones trying to figure out what's happening in Hawkins. When Elle, Max, and the others notice that something's up with Billy, they decide they need to find out if Billy has been mind flayed. So they lure him into the sauna at the pool, lock him in, and crank up the temperature in a bid to get answers. Unfortunately, all that does is activate a really angry Mind Flayer inside Billy, enabling him to free himself and take on Elle. At that point, the Mind Flayer recognizes Elle as the powerful enemy she is, and while the being had ignored her up until then, it was not going to after such a direct challenge. Not only does the Mind Flayer use Billy to beat Elle up, but it continues to track her afterwards. This is how it finds and attacks Hopper's cabin, badly injuring Elle and completely wrecking the house. It's hard not to appreciate Alexi's sheer enjoyment of the carnival in Hawkins. It's his first real taste of America, and he's having a blast. Yet both Murray and Alexi seem to lose sight of the fact that they're still on the run. So when Murray leaves Alexi alone to go find carnival food, it's hard not to get concerned. All the fun and games lower both of their guards, and Alexi and Murray even loudly shout at each other across the bustling crowds. Perhaps if they'd been more low-key, Grigory wouldn't have been able to get so close to Alexi and quietly take him out. If Alexi losing his life weren't bad enough, his demise has other consequences. Joyce and Hopper no longer have the one person who knows the codes to the Russian bunker. That delays Joyce and Hopper's entrance, which leads to Hopper's supposed end. You could argue that Susie kind of had Dustin over a barrel on this one. Still, things were a little bit dire when Dustin finally made contact with Susie to get Planck's constant, the code for the Russian bunker. As the only one who knows the information, everything hinged on Susie at that moment. Yet Susie refuses to give up the number until Dustin sings the theme song to the Neverending Story tour. And Dustin doesn't just sing a few bars, he sings the whole song. This may be Dustin and Susie's thing, but time was of the essence. Instead of making that clear to Susie or maybe singing less of the song, Dustin caved to her demands. That delayed Joyce and Hopper by several minutes. This was yet another thing that could have prevented Hopper from having to leave the safety of the control booth to shut down the portal. Throughout Stranger Things 3, Dr. Owens, the man who was so involved in Season 2, is nowhere to be found. What keeps him away? Joyce and Hopper attempt to contact him, and somehow he doesn't arrive until after the danger is past. Had Dr. Owen stepped in earlier, perhaps the citizens of Hawkins wouldn't have been mind flayed, and Hopper would still be around. Plus, the mall wouldn't have been blown sky high. Dr. Owen still seems to know more about the Upside Down and its denizens than anyone else, including us fans. Yet his absence prevented Hawkins from benefiting from any assistance he could have provided. Joyce's desire to move out of Hawkins is completely understandable. The town has been the site of some truly awful experiences for her and her family, yet moving Jonathan, Will, and especially Elle away from their home and the only support system they have seems short-sighted. Every one of them is traumatized, and instead of working through it together, Joyce's actions separate the gang in their time of need. And even if the kids make new friends wherever they're moving, they won't share the same bond with them. No one's been through experiences like what they've been through. While a new town may seem safer after everything that happened in Hawkins, it also represents its own psychological perils. Which of these decisions from Stranger Things 3 did you think were the worst? Did all of Hopper's questionable decisions change your feelings about him? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to The Binger for more great pop culture videos. Thanks for watching.